On a bitter winter night when the city seemed frozen in silence, Officer Ethan Blake moved steadily along his patrol route. The streets were empty, buried beneath a thin blanket of snow that shimmered faintly beneath the flickering glow of streetlights. The air was so cold that each breath came out like smoke, and the icy wind crept into every corner, seeping through even the thickest layers of clothing. Ethan pulled his collar higher, trying to shield himself from the biting chill, his sharp eyes scanning each alleyway, every shadow and every corner of the deserted blocks. Nights like this demanded extra attention. Quiet streets often hid the most unexpected stories. What Ethan didn't know was that before this night ended, his life would take a turn he would never forget. As he neared the back of an old neighborhood diner, a place called Frankie's that was known more for its neon sign than its food, something caught his attention. It wasn't the snow crunching under his boots nor the buzzing of the failing sign. It was a sound, so faint it almost disappeared into the wind. Ethan froze, holding his breath, his ears strained, and there it was again. A soft, weak whimper. It sounded like a plea, almost a cry for help, the kind of sound that tugged straight at the instincts of a man who had spent years listening for danger in silence. He reached for his flashlight, the cold metal pressing against his palm, and slowly moved toward the narrow alley behind the diner. Probably just some stray cats, he muttered to himself, trying to brush off the unease in his gut. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. His instincts rarely lied, and tonight they were louder than ever. The beam of his flashlight cut through the thick shadows, sweeping over crumpled newspapers, piles of trash bags, and a rusted green dumpster, with its paint peeling away. The whimper came again, this time weaker, more fragile. Ethan's chest tightened as he stepped forward. With his free hand, he pushed aside a soggy layer of garbage. What he found made his breath catch. Curled up in a tight, shivering ball was a tiny German shepherd puppy. Its fur was matted with dirt, its ribs showing through its frail body, and its half-closed eyes glistened with exhaustion and fear. The little creature trembled violently, as though clinging to its last scraps of life. "Oh, God," Ethan whispered under his breath, his heart tightening at the sight. For a moment he just stared, frozen by the weight of it all, the fragility of the pup, the cruel cold, the thought of how close it was to being lost forever. Without hesitation, Ethan shrugged off his thick coat and wrapped it carefully around the tiny body. The moment the warmth touched the pup, it whimpered softly, almost as if sensing hope for the first time. Ignoring the icy air that now bit through his own clothes, Ethan lifted the fragile creature gently against his chest. He could feel its shallow breaths, each one a desperate struggle. In that instant, Ethan knew leaving it behind wasn't an option. Some decisions make themselves, and this one was already made. He would not walk away without saving it. Hurrying back to his patrol car, Ethan shielded the pup as best he could, tucking it closer against his chest to share what warmth he had left. The wind whipped harshly across the deserted streets, driving him faster. His frozen fingers fumbled with the keys, and at last he slid into the driver's seat, pulling the door shut against the storm. "Hang in there, little guy," he murmured, starting the engine. The heater roared to life, filling the cabin with gradually spreading warmth. Ethan glanced down at the pup, still trembling beneath his coat. Every second mattered. Without wasting time, he mentally mapped out the quickest route to the nearest emergency veterinary clinic. The drive felt endless. Each red light, every turn, stretched into what seemed like hours. The streets were deserted, only the hum of the engine and the sound of the pup's faint breathing filling the silence. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened, his other arm still, holding the tiny bundle close. The puppy didn't stir, but the rise and fall of its chest told him the fight wasn't over yet. At last, the glowing sign of the veterinary clinic came into view. Ethan pressed the brakes hard, tires screeching against the icy pavement as he pulled to a stop near the entrance. In one swift motion, he opened the door and stepped out, the cold immediately clawing at him again. But all that mattered was the fragile life in his arms. The automatic glass doors swung open as he rushed inside, his boots leaving a trail of snow and water on the polished floor. The receptionist startled at his sudden arrival. Ethan's voice came out rough, urgent. "I found him in an alley. He's freezing, barely breathing." Within moments, a veterinarian in green scrubs appeared, her eyes sharp and focused. She gently but quickly took the pup from Ethan's arms, her practiced hands already assessing its condition. Ethan followed closely as she carried the pup into the bright, sterile examination room. On the heated pad, under the harsh lights, the true extent of the pup's condition became clear. Its ribs jutted out beneath its thin, dirty fur. Its tiny body was shockingly weak. The vet moved swiftly, inserting an IV into the trembling leg, her face calm but serious. "If you hadn't brought him in when you did," she said, her voice steady but heavy with meaning, "he wouldn't have survived another hour." Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words press against his chest. He stepped back, pulling out his phone with stiff fingers. Quietly, he called his partner. To cover the rest of his shift, then sank into one of the hard plastic chairs in the waiting area. Hours dragged by, filled only with the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of his restless thoughts. Finally, the door to the examination room opened. The vet stepped out, pulling down her mask with a sigh of relief. "He's going to be okay," she said, offering a small smile. "He's still weak, but he's out of danger." The weight Ethan had been carrying seemed to lift in that moment. He stood quickly, following her back into the room. On a padded bed lay the small German shepherd, still hooked to tiny IV lines, but with eyes open now, dim, yes, but alive, brighter than before. Ethan approached slowly. The pup's ears twitched, and when their eyes met, something passed between them. "Hey there, little guy," Ethan murmured softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He reached out a hand carefully, half expecting the pup to shy away. But instead, the tiny creature leaned into his touch, pressing its head gently into Ethan's palm, as if recognizing the warmth that had saved it. Ethan's throat tightened. In that quiet moment, he knew he hadn't just saved a life. He had found something far more meaningful. "You're a fighter," he whispered, his hand moving tenderly over the pup's head. A name came to him naturally, as though it had always belonged to this little survivor. Shadow. That's your name. The little clinic on the corner smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. Emily clutched Shadow tightly in her arms as they walked in, her heart thudding in her chest. The puppy trembled, his ears pressed flat against his head, too weak even to bark. Behind the counter, a kind-eyed veterinarian looked up and immediately hurried over, her face softening at the sight. "What happened to him?" the vet asked gently, already motioning Emily toward a small room. Emily stammered, I just found him on the street. He was so cold. I couldn't just leave him." The vet nodded, taking Shadow into her careful hands. Emily's arms felt painfully empty as the puppy was laid on the metal table under the bright light. The vet listened to his chest, checked his paws, and whispered things Emily barely understood. "Malnourished, dehydrated, lucky you found him now." Emily stood frozen, her fists clenched by her sides. She wanted to stay right, there to hold Shadow's paw the entire time, but she knew she had to let the vet do her work. So she whispered instead, Please don't let him die." For hours, Emily waited on a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, swinging her legs restlessly, clutching Shadow's tiny collar the vet had taken off. Every sound of a door opening made her jump. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. All she could think about was whether Shadow would wake up. Finally, the vet returned with a tired but hopeful smile. "He's a fighter," she said softly. "But he'll need care, medicine, and food. Do you think you can handle that?" Emily nodded fiercely, though inside her chest swirled doubt. She was just a kid. How could she possibly do this? The next weeks were filled with quiet battles. Emily snuck out scraps from dinner to save for Shadow. She walked to the library, arms full of borrowed books on puppies, nutrition, and training. Every morning before school, she measured out his medicine with trembling hands, whispering encouragement as he swallowed. Some nights, she stayed awake, stroking his fur until she was sure he was still breathing. It wasn't easy. Her parents shook their heads, telling her that maybe it wasn't practical, that maybe she should let a shelter take over. But Emily shook her head every time. "He needs me," she whispered, clutching Shadow's paw. "And I need him." Time moved slowly, but Shadow grew stronger. His ribs no longer showed, his legs steadied. His eyes, once dim, now gleamed with life. He followed Emily everywhere, down the block to the park, even waiting outside her school. Wherever Emily was, Shadow was close behind, his head held high, as if he knew she had saved him. But as Shadow grew, so did the challenge. He was bigger than Emily now, strong and restless. She spent hours walking him, brushing his coat, sneaking food from her own plate to fill his bowl. There were days she wondered if she was good enough, if someone older, richer, wiser could give him more. One night, sitting on the edge of her bed while Shadow snored softly in the corner, Emily whispered into the dark, "I don't want to lose you. But what if letting you go is what's best for you?" Her voice cracked, and tears soaked her pillow. The day finally came when a loving family with a large backyard and the means to care for a dog offered to take Shadow. Emily walked him to the gate, her hands shaking on the leash. Shadow wagged his tail, nuzzling her cheek as if sensing her sadness. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his fur, inhaling the smell of sunshine and grass. "Be happy," she whispered, forcing a smile as she let the leash slip from her hand. Shadow looked back once, his dark eyes meeting hers, before bounding toward his new home. For months, Emily felt the ache of emptiness. Every creak of the house reminded her of the silence where Shadow's paws should have been. She missed his weight against her legs at night, his nose nudging her palm. Sometimes, walking home from school, she still half expected him to come running down the street to greet her. Years passed. Emily grew taller, her voice steadier, her world busier. But in her heart, the memory of Shadow never faded. And then, one golden afternoon, fate gave her a gift. She was walking through the park, now a teenager, her mind tangled with schoolwork and plans, when she saw a familiar shape. A German shepherd, full-grown, strong and noble, trotted across the grass. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be? "Shadow," she whispered, her voice trembling. The dog froze. His ears perked, his head turned, and in an instant he was racing toward her. Emily dropped her books and fell to her knees just as Shadow barreled into her arms, whining with joy. His tail thumped wildly, his tongue smothering her face in frantic kisses. Emily laughed through her tears, hugging him as if she'd never let go again. "You remembered me," she cried, burying her face in his thick fur. "You never forgot." In that moment, time folded in on itself. The lonely girl on the city street, the trembling puppy by the lamppost, the quiet nights of whispered prayers, and all of it lived inside this reunion. Shadow had grown, and so had Emily, but the bond they had forged in those fragile first days had never broken. Critical 6-year-old Liam Parker had been missing for over an hour. If they didn't find him soon, the situation could turn dire. Shadow moved. Steadily beside Ethanis, they entered the dense forest near the playground where Liam was last seen. Ethan knelt down, holding up the small blue sweater Liam's mother had given him. He brought it close to Shadow. "This ish's scent find him, Shadow," Ethan whispered. Shadow sniffed the sweater, deeply his body tensing as he locked onto the trail. Suddenly, he let out a sharp, decisive bark and began leading the way, nose close to the ground, with practice, precision. Ethan followed, closely, his flashlight being cutting through the thick underbrush. The other officers moved parallel to him, maintaining formation. The deeper they went, the darker and more foreboding. The forest became, after about 20 minutes, shadow. Abruptly veered off the main search grid. Some of the officers hesitated. "We're moving out of the designated search area." One officer noted Ethan paused, glancing at Shadow, who stood rigid, his eyes focused intensely ahead. Ethan knew better than to doubt the dog's instincts. "We're following." Shadow Ethan commanded. The team continued, pushing further into the dense woods. Eventually, an old, decrepit house emerged from the shadows. Ethan's stomach tightened at the sight. This house wasn't on any map. Shadow growled low, a warning, "Stay alert." Ethan whispered as they approached the house. Weapons were drawn. As footsteps slowed, they entered through a creaky wooden door. The flashlight beams illuminated peeling wallpaper and rotting floorboards. There was thick with the stench of mold and decay. Shadow LED them into a large room and began scratching furiously at the floor, barking 3 times in quick succession. "There's something under here," Ethan said, signaling for an officer to help. Together, they pried up the floorboards, revealing a hidden staircase. "Move carefully," Ethan instructed, descending into the dark cellar. A faint whimper caught Ethan's attention. He aimed his flashlight toward the corner and saw a small figure, Liam, curled up and shivering. Shadow moved swiftly to the boy's side, gently nudging his hand. "In comfort, Liam. We're here to help," Ethan said, softly approaching to check on the boy's condition. Liam was alive, but weak. Ethan scooped him into his arms, holding him protectively. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above. Ethan's head snapped up. "Someone's coming." A man appeared at the top of the stairs, wielding a knife. Ethan couldn't draw his weapon in time while holding Liam, but before the attacker could strike, Shadow launched himself forward, slamming into the man with incredible force. The knife clattered to the ground as the men yelled. In pain, Shadow held his ground, even as a shallow cut formed along his side. Ethan quickly restrained the attacker and secured him in handcuffs. Shadow stood by, alert but steady. Despite his injury, "You did great, Shadow." "We got them," Ethan whispered, stroking the dog's head with gratitude. The team safely extracted Liam and apprehended their remaining criminals. The mission was a success, thanks to Shadow's bravery and sharp instincts. Ethan quickly drove Shadow to the veterinary clinic as soon as the mission ended. The dog had performed heroically, but the wound on his side needed immediate attention. Ethan drove in silence, his eyes frequently darting to the rearview mirror to check on Shadow. The dog's breathing was steady, but it was clear that he was exhausted. When they arrived, the veterinary staff rushed Shadow inside. Ethan stood in the waiting room, his hands and shirt stained with Shadow's blood. A heavy sense of helplessness washed over him as he waited. Time crawled by. Painfully slow, each second brought back flashes of the intense moments in the abandoned house. He could still see Shadow leaping to protect him and Liam. The first light of dawn streamed through the clinic's windows. When the vet finally emerged, she looked tired but offered a reassuring smile. "Shadow's going to be fine. The wound isn't too serious, though. He did lose quite a bit of blood. We've stitched him up and we'll keep him under observation," she said. Ethan exhaled in relief, the weight on his chest finally easing. "Can I see him?" he asked, softly. In the recovery room, Shadow lay in a padded bed, his side wrapped in bandages. An IV line was attached to his front leg, but his eyes were brighter now. When Ethan entered the room, Shadow's tail wagged faintly on the bedding. Ethan knelt beside him gently, stroking the dog's head, a smile tugging at his lips. "You did good, Shadow. You saved me." "And Liam," Ethan murmured. Shadow leaned into his hand, eyes full of trust and warmth. In the days that followed, Ethan stayed by Shadow's side. The dog recovered quickly. Thanks to the dedicated care of the veterinary team and Ethan's constant presence, before long Shadow was walking again, the wound healing into a faint scar. 2 weeks later, Ethan sat on his front porch watching the sky transform into a brilliant shade of orange as the sun set. Shadow lay at his feet, eyes half closed in peaceful contentment. Nearby, Rex lounged quietly, also enjoying the tranquil evening. Ethan gently patted Shadow's head, reflecting on everything they had endured together, sometimes saving. "A life doesn't just change theirs, Ethan," whispered, his gaze distant as he looked out toward the horizon. "It changes yours too." Shadow glanced up at him as if for understanding the words. His tail gave a small, happy wag in response.